This is the Comics Alternative Interviews, conversations with the 2dcloud creators, Gina Wynbrandt, Will Dinski, and MariNaomi. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews. I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about comics.
And on this episode, we have separate conversations with Gina Wynbrandt, Will Dinski, and MariNaomi about their new books from 2dcloud. But before we get to those conversations, we want to let all of you guys know that this episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews is brought to you by the wonderful folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are 20 to 35% off of the cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some wonderful specials. Sometimes those specials will be at 45% off the cover price, sometimes at 50% off, but often you can find discounts that are more impressive than that.
That's right, and when this episode comes out, it'll be the beginning of September, so you can check out dcbservice.com for all the great deals they'll have for the month of September.
That's right. Every month they have great discounts, and you're going to have to check out to see what they have for September by going to their website, dcbservice.com. It's the place for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your comics there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you.
That's right.
Well, Andy, this was a series of 3 fun conversations and insightful conversations, and it's something a little different. We've never – well, actually, I was about to say we've never done anything like this before, but actually our last interview episode was something similar where we interviewed Nate Powell and Andrew Iden separately and then included both of those in one interview show. And we do something similar here. We're interviewing Gina Wynbrandt, Will Dinski, and MariNaomi because each of them have new books that have just come out or will soon come out from 2dcloud. Now, with Gina, the book came out in May. It's Someone Please Have Sex With Me. After Gina, we talk with Will Dinski. His new book comes out in November, Trying Not to Notice. And then we wrap up with a conversation with MariNaomi. Her book, Turning Japanese, a graphic memoir, came out in May as well. Yeah,
so three separate interviews with 3 great creators, and these interviews were a lot of fun.
Yes, and not only is it a great way for us to get introduced to 3 different creators, but also to learn much more about 2dcloud. And we've talked about 2dcloud books in the past, but this is the first time we've really delved into it deeply.
That's right.
So let's listen to those conversations.
Yep.
We're pleased to have on the Comics Alternative Gina Wynbrandt. Her new book, Someone Please Have Sex With Me, was released in May from 2dcloud. Gina, welcome back on the Comics Alternative.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yep, thanks for joining us.
Now, I say welcome back because I had the pleasure of meeting you last year at Small Press Expo, and at that time, your mini-comic Big Pussy was nominated for an Ignatz Award.
Yes, it was.
And in fact, that comic is included in this new book, Someone Please Have Sex With Me. And correct me if I'm wrong, this new book is basically a collection of your previous mini-comics that you've been publishing between, 2012 and this year?
Yes.
Okay, so now that you have collected all of these into book form, do you still have plans to continue doing mini comics, or have you had a taste of the longer form book now and want to shoot for that format?
I still really like the mini comic formula. Like, I've been kind of busy working on some other smaller projects, but I just think that's like the perfect length for a comic, or just that's what makes sense in my head. I still don't really feel ready to make a like graphic novel length comic. But yeah, my next book will probably be another collection of mini comics is my best guess.
Now, outside of the mini comics, probably one of the places that listeners might know you from is the fact that the story "Someone Please Have Sex with Me" that's in this collection was included in the Best American Comics 2015 volume. Have you gotten a lot of response to that in particular?
Not so much, I don't think. It's maybe a little bit, but I honestly, I self-published Someone Please Have Sex with Me in spring of 2014, and, just basically on a pretty local level. And as soon as I thought it was printed, I was like, cool, I can't wait for, the inevitable rush of male attention that's going to happen upon its release. And I was really excited for that, but it never happened. I'm like, that's weird. But surely when it's in Best American Comics on this national level, I'm going to get a lot of emails. But that didn't happen either. And I'm furious at the series, frankly, for not ensuring that there would be a great response to answer my plea. But I'm living. We'll see.
So no word from Justin Bieber either?
Not from Justin Bieber either. Just a lot of hardship really in my career. It's not going well. But no, maybe one day. My mom says we're going to meet professionally as peers eventually.
Now, I mentioned Justin Bieber. Now, for those, though, who may not be familiar with your comics, this may sound a little strange. So can you describe to our listeners the kind of comics that we can find in Someone Please Have Sex with Me?
Sure. I would say Justin Bieber was my first great artistic muse, starting in 2011. And my first real mini comic, which is also the first mini comic in my book, is all about, being an adult fan of Justin Bieber and why I love him so much and, why it's humiliating. And he also reappears in a smaller sense, in some of my other work as well.
And it's not just Justin Bieber, but it's many other celebrities who are a part of how should we call it? Our pop culture, our self-promotion culture.
I would say pop culture and celebrities and
famous for the sake of being famous?
To some extent, but I think more I'm interested in like the celebrities that are like teen oriented or teen aimed, or like, not just Justin Bieber, but other like pop singers. And I have a younger sister, so I'm like kind of aware of what the celebrities she's aware of. Like Kim Kardashian comes up a lot, and like not like my sister's a big fan, but like she's, they're famous to her age group. Like I feel like I'm 26 and I'm desperately trying to cling to my 13-year-old sister and her knowledge of pop culture. But yeah, at least that's what I've always been interested in celebrity culture, and for whatever reason, it's skewed teen-centric in my comics.
Derek is always so dismissive of this kind of manufactured celebrity, and that's just to mask his love for Bobby Sherman and David Cassidy back in the day.
Oh God, you're outing me.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Podcast
Gina,
exclusive.
Yeah. You're getting the dope here live. Now, you mentioned Kim Kardashian. I have to say, Gina, my favorite part of Someone Please Have Sex With Me is in your second story, Tiger Beat Exclusive, where you're visited by your fairy godmother, Kim Kardashian. And at one point, she says, "You know why my ass is so big? Because it's filled with magic."
Correct, yes.
And you know what I think our listeners could tell just from the few minutes we've been talking with you so far is your great sense of humor. And to me, this really does define your mini comics, and it comes through in every single story. And I was thinking before we started to talk this evening, you know, how would I describe your comics to someone who wasn't familiar with them? And I was thinking maybe autobiographical, but not really. And they're almost like some kind of fantastical or warped version of like autobiographical comics, something like A Strange Confession. Would that describe it to you?
Sure, I think that's a good description. Another way I've described it before is like fan fiction for my own life, because all the things that I use to characterize myself are canon of my real life, but I just put myself in, you know, stupid situations, or, you know, of course, it's just, you know, wish fulfillment to be like, look, I'm drawing myself next to Justin Bieber, like, oh, you know, that never happened, but, you know, in my comic, it's real. You know, that's how some celebrity-oriented fan fiction is, where it's just like, I don't know, it just, we want to see this character do this thing, but I'm the character.
So it feels like it's the kind of natural outcome to that adolescent tradition of, say, you know, writing your name over and over again in a notebook as like Mrs. Gina Bieber or something like that. Yeah. and then taking it like 3 or 4 steps further than that.
Right. I mean, I would expect him to take my last name, first of all.
Okay.
But yes, you're right.
Now, if these are kind of comedic confessions, I mean, there's nonetheless, though, a sense of exposure here in that you're putting yourself out there. You're putting your yourself, your emotional maturity and wants and needs out there. Do you ever feel in doing these mini comics that there's something, I don't know, potentially frightening for you in writing about yourself in this way? Or does the comedy provide enough of a protective shield?
Yeah, I mean, what do you mean by frightened, I guess?
Well, I mean, showing readers a side of you that many people may not know, your vulnerabilities, your interests, you know, your desires, your maybe fetishes for Justin Bieber. No, not really. I don't think that stuff bothers me, because by nature I'm a very TMI person, or just I'm always like, you know, telling people information they don't want to know about my life anyways, and like you know, trying to make my own failed, you know, romantic or sexual conquests like as funny when I'm telling my friends, you know, because you know, I don't really like reading autobio that's, you know, about the same like sad insecurities that I have, but it's not funny. It's like I want people to read it and laugh, first of all, and then I'm just, you know, able to pull from my own personal emotions and feelings to be able to, you know, create a narrative that fits into a funny way. Did that make sense? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, in that way, do you consider yourself somewhat of a comedian?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, I consider myself like a comedic writer. I think it would be hard to see myself doing any projects where I'm not trying to be funny in some way.
You know, one of the things I love about the story, Someone Please Have Sex With Me, is how you kind of extrapolate into the future of your life. So you've got this, this kind of contemporary autobiographical stuff, but then you go out into the future in which you imagine a future that technology kind of catches up to to your ideas of love and relationships, right? but it does so at about the time you're like 100 years old.
Yeah, about there.
Well, I think that is kind of a fascinating idea, and it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote it when I was like, what was it? I don't know. What was I, 23? Yeah, I was 23 or 24. 23 when I was writing it. And just, being very sexually and romantically frustrated. But it just had been building since puberty anyways. But I'm like, I feel like I'm going to go insane. So, like, how does anyone, live their whole life, where it just, like, keeps getting worse? So that was my idea for the comic to be, what if I am never sexually fulfilled and just get creepier and more desperate until I die.
Now, in pulling together these various mini-comics into the book, were you aware, or did you become aware of your growth as an artist in ways that maybe you didn't even think about before you put this book together?
I kind of always think about that, I guess, because always my next mini comic to be, more successful than the previous one in some way. So, but yeah, seeing it all together in the book, I appreciate that, reading it in the order that I drew it, you can see how I've improved in various ways. So, I like that part of it.
I mean, and not even in terms of the art style, but in terms of your subject matter and storytelling abilities. I mean, have you noticed a progression of you being able to handle your stories between, let's say, 2012 and today?
Oh, yeah, for sure. That as well. I mean, the first story is definitely the one that is, still semi-fictional with, exaggerated parts, but the closest to reality. And then as each comic goes on, I kind of put less and less truth in it, and I'm kind of making up more and more things. I just find it, I don't know, because I feel like I would write the same comic over and over. Like, my life is very similar to how I describe it in the first comic, One Less Lonely Girl, where it's like, I'm on the computer a lot, and I'm, I'm Googling Justin Bieber pictures and, crying and sleeping, so... And then, yeah, I don't know. And I enjoy giving myself the challenge to, not rely. I'm more interested in developing the characterization of myself than, I don't know, making it all in one universe or, I don't know. I'm rambling, but that's my answer.
Do you see yourself writing more and more fictional and having your characters, including the Gina character, less anchored in reality?
Yeah, I think each one gets more and more detached from reality. The most recent comic in the book is Manhunt, which is about me basically like 3/4 of the comic is me entered into a video game, so, mm-hmm. and then there's its own narrative within the video game, but it's, it's not even real life at that point.
Yeah, that strikes me as the most sophisticated in terms of storytelling in this collection.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that story a lot. It, I don't know, it reminded me a bit, I don't know, Derek, if you remember this game, Leisure Suit Larry.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if Gina, if you were familiar with that game.
Yep.
Well, actually, part of my inspiration for that comic was from my uncle, Mike Science, who also created similar sexy video games. Most famously, Virtual Valerie, but he also did Mac Playmate in like 1985.
Wow.
So
He did Virtual Valerie?
Yes, he did.
Oh,
he
cool.
did Virtual Valerie. He was on an episode of Real Sex that I saw in 7th grade on HBO. And I had to listen to my uncle wish he had 3 hands to play his game. But that definitely made it easier for my family to handle my work, because it's like, yeah, it's called Someone Please Have Sex With Me, but it's not a literal porn video game.
Well, what is your relationship with your family in terms of the comics? I mean, when they read your mini comics, do they feel a little uncomfortable that you're maybe exposing yourself a little too much, or are they completely cool with it?
It's mixed. My mom's side of the family is like super liberal and open to that stuff, and they have all read my book and like my comics and have nothing negative to say. But my dad's never read my book, and no one on my dad's side of the family has read it. And my dad can only refer to my book as that book that has 5 comics in it. But my dad's side of the family still is able to recognize, based on what I tell them, that I'm being successful and they are proud of me. But he just can't bring himself to read the work itself.
Now, you mentioned self-publishing some of your earlier comics. How did you come into contact with 2dcloud?
I heard from them, I think it was, late summer 2014. I believe the way they found me was through a live reading that was recorded that I did for Brain Frame, which is a comics reading. I'm so sorry, I just had to burp. A comics reading that happened in Chicago by Lear Hill. They saw a video of me doing a reading and enjoyed it. And they said if I ever wanted to do something with them, they would love to publish something. So I had just finished drawing Big Pussy, basically, and I was going to self-publish it, but I gave it to them.
And so that was the first comic you published with 2dcloud, is Big Pussy.
Right.
And by the way, on the topic of Big Pussy, I have to say that one of the things that I love about that story, but also it disturbs me to no end, the faces on the cats.
Yeah, a lot of people are fans of those cats.
Where did you come up with this? And we should describe for our listeners that basically you have a set of, 4 cats that you encounter in this comic, but they have the face of humans. Correct. So where'd this come from?
Well, the way I started writing the story, it's, based off Sailor Moon, who has a guardian cat that kind of teaches her stuff. And I knew I wanted to do my homage to that relationship of cat mentor. But then, I feel not confident drawing animals or didn't know how to make an expressive a cat with an expression. I don't know. So I just copied human expressions and put them where a cat face should be. Otherwise you would just be looking at, 4 cat faces, being cute. And not, it'd be difficult. My drawing ability would damage the story by not, and it was just fun I always, I draw a lot from photographs. So I just looked at some pictures of Ray Liotta and Weird Al Yankovic and Nick Cage and other very masculine expressive faces.
Yeah, I actually recording here. I'm surrounded by cats. None of them have human faces, but I'm sure they would all enjoy doing lines of cocaine and and so many of the other things that you would do with these cats in the story.
Where we were actually snorting catnip. There are no. I forget how the.
Oh, that's right.
There are no Schedule 1 drugs.
That's right.
In the making of this comic.
Yes.
Yeah, I missed the catnip bag next to the lines you're laying out.
So, I mean, are you currently at work on your next mini comic?
Sort of on and off. I've been taking on I did some commissioned illustration work, and I also, since I finished the book, I've started working full time in my day job. So I'm just going to stop doing comics. But I'm definitely, I have a lot less time to work on them, because the whole time I did the work, the book, I was living at home and kind of chilling. But now I live on my own. Anyways, I'm still doing stuff, but things have just kind of been crazy in the past few months. But I have sort of started the beginnings of what could possibly eventually maybe be a mini comic.
Now, you and Derek had met previously at SPX. Are you going to be there again this year?
Yes, I am. I will be there with 2dcloud.
Great. Any other con appearances you have lined up?
I think I'm also going to Short Run, but I'm not 100% sure. But I think so. I hope so.
And where's Short Run?
In Seattle.
Okay. Is that one you've been to before?
No, I've never gone before, and I've never visited Seattle either.
Oh, it's beautiful.
I'm very excited.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, Gina, I definitely look forward to seeing you next month at SPX, but we thank you for coming on the Comics Alternative and talking about your new book, Someone Please Have Sex With Me.
Thanks for having me. Come say hi to me at SPX. I'll also be selling T-shirts, so get one.
Oh, you'll have to pick me up a T-shirt, Derek.
Okay. We're pleased to have on the podcast Will Dinski. His new book, Trying Not to Notice, is going to be coming out later this fall from 2dcloud. Will, thanks for being on the Comics Alternative.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now, you and I spoke briefly at Small Press Expo last year. I interviewed there at your table. Yeah. And actually, you were tabling by yourself. You weren't with the 2D crowd, or 2dcloud crowd. Will you be at SPX this year?
Yep, I'll be there again this year, and I'll have my own table again.
Oh, okay.
I like to have my own, because I have books from other people, and I have my handmade stuff too, and I like to be able to have a place where it can all spread out.
Now, I've heard it's difficult to get a table at SPX. How difficult is it?
I've been going for a really long time. I probably couldn't even tell you how many times I've been. So I think I'm kind of grandfathered in at this point.
Okay.
It's not too tough. I think I do remember the big lottery explosion. Do you guys remember that, where they kind of they opened up the website to people, and so many people wanted to go that it crashed the website.
Yeah.
And they kind of changed the way that they do things. That was probably the last time that I had to kind of roll the dice to see if I'd get a table.
Well, let's talk about your upcoming book, Trying Not to Notice. And one of the things that struck me about this, I guess, immediately, is that it's a longer form story, and I have been used to your shorter comics. I know last year you introduced me to your collection, Quick and Painless Short Stories, mostly about death. And I've seen some of your other shorter works as well. But do you prefer working in a longer form?
I do now. For a very long time, I really only did shorter stories, but couldn't quite get a handle on how to do something longer. Now that I've done Trying Not to Notice, and I'm also working on another longer piece, it's my preferred mode of working now.
Because you had Fingerprints in 2010. That came out from Top Shelf, right?
Yep, and that had been the longest piece I had done previously. But,
why after Fingerprints, which is a longer story, then going into more short story form? Was it just something you wanted to do at the time?
I think at that time I really enjoyed making artist books a lot too, which I still do. Picking out the paper and kind of like trying different formats and structuring a book and designing a book. And, a short story is great. I can just kind of make a story and then make a book for it and then move on to another book. So it was kind of tied in with my love of bookmaking too. Now when I'm doing a longer story, I'm really not making books at all. So it's kind of a trade-off there.
So I have to say I really enjoyed Trying Not to Notice. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about it is your approach to character. Your characters feel so kind of lived in and existing in the real world in ways that really made them, I think, familiar in some ways and made them really engaging. So could you talk a little bit about how you went about creating the characters that take up this narrative?
Well, thanks. It's nice to hear that you see them as, or they came across as real characters. It's the benefit of working in a longer form where what I really wanted to be able to do is really get inside of a character's head and not worry about how long it took to, explore the way they think or the things that they would do. And this was, Trying Not to Notice was, trying to kind of figure out this main character who's the kind of the comedian actor guy in it, and figuring out him through the people in his life, and then ultimately back to him, that was kind of always the goal, like really just latching onto a character and spending as much time as I could with them, in relation to him, just to give it structure, to give the story or the book something to hang on to, where, even though it's kind of about 4 different people, it's really all about that main character.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think when one first starts reading the book, one might expect it to be a collection of short stories.
Right.
With the first one titled "My Friend Kyle Has Got It All Figured Out," but then when we get to the second part, "My Coworker Summer Has a Bright Future," a little ways into it, we realize that Summer works, that the first person narrator of those title pages is this John, who becomes the main character throughout. So it was really nice to also then you give the reader a lot of work to do to piece these things together, but it's good work. It really engages the reader and makes for an active reading experience.
Thanks. Yeah, it's I'd like to think that the reader can pick up on a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I went to college, to MCAD in Minneapolis, and I studied comics there. And it was the best part of that education was really learning how to be really clear with the reader, and not, to walk them through the story as they're reading it and making sure that you're communicating what you really want to say, which is a great skill to learn. And through that, I've kind of like learned that I don't need to say everything, and kind of like letting go a lot of that and just kind of letting the reader make a lot of those kind of decisions and connections on their own when I can.
Yeah, I know. In reading, Trying Not to Notice, I thought with that first section, My Friend Kyle Has Got It All Figured Out, I just assumed that this was going to be a book about Kyle, the comedian, because that's who was the focus and the narrator of that first section. Then we shift into the second part, which is about John's coworker, Summer. And then the third part, his wife Amanda, My Wife Amanda Can Do Anything, is the title of that third section. And so it took me a while to realize, this is not a collection of individual stories about people in John's life. This is a longer form story about John.
Yeah.
And at first I did not see on the cover the outline of John's head. Mm-hmm. And it was only after going through the book that I realized, okay, now that visual makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing I really enjoyed about this book is that the inner titles that begin each section, it just reminded me immediately of Woody Allen's Hannah and Her Sisters.
Oh.
Because each section of that film begins with something similar.
Oh.
And Andy's probably going to accuse me of always bringing Woody Allen into our conversations, which I do tend to do. But I did think of Hannah and Her Sisters when I started reading Trying Not to Notice.
Well, that's funny. It's actually, I did take that from Joseph Heller. Something Fell? Or
Something Happened.
Something Happened, yes.
Yeah.
Have you read? Yeah, Something Happened.
Yeah.
That was probably a big influence on this book. His book being far more relentless and bleak, but but totally not altogether different. But no, I'm glad how those kind of help tie it together.
Yeah, I read Something Happened in high school, and on my own, not assigned, and I really feel like that colored the rest of my life. You could draw a straight line from reading that at 16 to 47.
Oh my God. You'd be like, I'm never going into business.
And I'm never using parentheses again either.
Now, you mentioned the bleak tone of Something Happened. When we get to the end of Trying Not to Notice, and no spoilers here, but it does end in a rather ambiguous manner, and I think you could read it as perhaps bleak in some way. I don't think it's overtly so. I mean, is that your feeling of your own ending?
For me, I think it's more that each of these characters have this kind of vision for their lives that they want to have, or something they want, or a place that they want to be. And they seem to be getting there and yet not really looking at their life as it really is, or ignoring it, or altering it in some way. And I think that the main character does that to the strongest degree. So it's not even so much that it's bleak, but that because he's so far away from where he thinks that he should be or is, it just seems more sad.
Mm-hmm. You do something similar in one of your other 2dcloud mini comics, An Honest Performance, in that you get into the life of a character. Mm-hmm. In this case, a musician. I mean, it's almost as if you inhabit his skin momentarily in order to give us a glimpse into who this person is and how he sees things.
Yeah. I like that story quite a bit. That one's about he's having a documentary film made about his life. So the story kind of takes place really as it's finishing, and because you see documentaries about people and you always kind of wonder, like, they never get the footage of them right after it's released, or what they think about or what they feel after they've kind of revealed everything. So I kind of I was compelled to write a story like that.
And you do place the premiere of The Smallest Violin, the documentary, I see, in Minneapolis.
Oh, yeah.
Hennepin and Lindale and so on.
Yeah, improbably at a cross-section. Hennepin. Not really thinking anyone would notice, so.
But yeah, I mean, I feel like that one of the things I really liked about that story is that, I mean, Derek used the phrase, living in the character's skin, that we kind of enter this person's world as as a momentous thing has already happened to him pretty much.
Yeah.
And then we're getting kind of the what would be I think a longer story like the downturn or the denouement or whatever in the ending, but again, it creates an active reading experience where we that again, and also then feels familiar. So your approach to narrative and the character, I think both this and Trying Not to Notice, both of them do that really well in immersing the reader into those characters' worlds.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I think that An Honest Performance is probably an early project that I did that kind of gave me confidence to work on something longer. Where where I could kind of go into a character a little bit deeper and feel like there's other stories I could tell about that character if I needed to or wanted to.
And I think that one of the things that strikes me about your work is, I guess, the context that I'm reading it. Now, we're doing this series of interviews with 3 creators, publishing with 2dcloud. Mm-hmm. And with MariNaomi, it's obviously straight autobiographical comics. With Gina Wynbrandt, it's more autobiographical, confessional, but with a wild comedic twist. Mm-hmm. One of the things that marks your storytelling, by contrast, is the fact that you really don't get into yourself, but it's your ability to get into the deep inner lives of other characters, of fictional, I'm assuming, characters, and to make them seem something almost memoir-like in the telling of their stories.
Yeah, whenever I've done a couple memoir or autobiographical stories in the past, and I tend to kind of heavily fictionalize them immediately. And I even have stories that I've written that just became a mess because I would lose interest and just start making things up or shifting things around. So it's, it would be kind of nice to be able to, do a memoir or maybe if something exceptional happens to me, then it'll be a way easier for me. But I'm more inclined to write a fictional story, just making it up as I go.
And you seem to be fascinated by strange, unusual, and sometimes dysfunctional relationships. At least that's what I get from some of the stories in Quick and Painless.
Yeah, well, they're funnier, right?
Yeah. Yeah, in kind of a strange, twisted way, often.
Yeah. I mean, I just, I'd like to write about interesting people. Mm-hmm. And people, with, strange jobs or interesting perspectives and figuring out why they have those perspectives or those weird jobs.
Now, where did the stories in Quick and Painless primarily first appear?
Oh, boy, that book is a collection it's years of work. So they're kind of all over the place. There's the individual, the in-between stories that are more like little, mostly funny, and they're little stick people.
Oh, the stick figure, yeah.
Yeah, those were all from a project they did, a series of letterpress comics. And in a big handmade box that I got a fellowship to create, and I was really, really happy with those comics and that project, but I'd only made like 20 of them, so not a lot of people got to read them. So it was nice to put them in a book because they seemed to a nice way to kind of break up all the various stories that I had. So those were from that. Covered in Confusion is a book that I had self-published a while ago.
Because I think that's about the longest in the collection, right?
Yeah, that's the longest one. That was a story that I would sell out of a lot, so I wanted to print up more copies of it again.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned your interest in not just self-publishing, but in the actual creative act of producing a book with particular kind of paper, texture, binding. I mean, when you make a decision, when you create a comic, you've been publishing with 2dcloud for a while. So what goes into your decision? Is this something that you want to self-publish or give to 2dcloud?
I think it's usually I'll do a piece and then I'll just kind of get a sense of whether or not it would be better for me to do or for Rain at 2dcloud to put out. There's like with an honest performance in particular, like at that time Rain was doing a lot of those kind of risograph minicomics. And it just seemed like a good fit for him to put out. Trying Not to Notice was something that they had asked me for a longer piece and a longer book. So I did that specifically for Rain and Justin, who asked me to do that. And then Ablatio Penis I had. I think that they were still looking for work to publish. That was very early on in their publishing history.
Yeah, so that was about 2012, right?
Yeah, maybe earlier.
And that was a presidential election year. Any coincidence that this story deals with politicians and it came out in 2012?
No. I just love. I could do nothing but political stories, probably. I hope to do another one someday. I'm fascinated by it.
Well, it's a great story with an interesting twist. I don't want to give the twist away, though the title kind of does. But the there's something in there that could have been played for yucks, and it isn't. It is done in a really kind of empathetic way, and so my question is kind of, I don't know, kind of basic as far as that book is concerned. Like, where did that story come from? But again, it feels with a lot of your stuff, it just feels they feel unique in ways that the word unique really means, or we don't see anything else like them. So I'm curious about with Ablatio Penis where that kind of idea came from.
I think that the general idea of it was that just thinking about people and kind of like if you have maybe a trauma or possibly a secret, something that you don't tell people, how much that actually can affect and influence the things that people see of you and the things that you do. And I thought of what would be a very interesting secret for a person to have and what would be the most public position that person could have. And I thought, a politician, I'd been wanting to do a political story for a while, and that kind of seemed right up my alley. That's what I remember of it. I'm trying to think back.
But it's interesting then that you that thought process of having the secret, have it be a politician, but then also having it be a Republican politician who has this particular secret, which kind of adds a level of depth to that character as well.
Yeah, I didn't want to. I wanted you to feel bad for the person, or I wanted you to sympathize. Maybe you wouldn't agree with them, but you wouldn't think that this particular secret, for all the things that are stacked against him, that maybe that's not a good enough reason for somebody not to be a governor or a senator. Yeah, I was just watching. Was it that Roosevelt's documentary?
The Kevin Byrne.
and it's like showing all these pictures of Roosevelt at Warm Springs, and he's got stick legs. And they're like, this is not someone who would ever be president now. And it's true. I mean, as somebody who is that really disfigured and handicapped, I mean, there was a reason he hid it. It's just unfortunate because he was such an amazing president.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you've mentioned, again, sticking with Ablatio Penis, your love of just the packaging of your stories. And one of the things that struck me about Ablatio Penis, I mean, this is about an American election, right? These two people, specifically the Republican, running for this governor's office. And then the comic itself is in just right there in your face, red, white, and blue with some stripes and stars. And then you open up the inside and you have more stars. It was created in capital letters in the United States of America. The Graphic Communication Conference International Brotherhood of Teamsters helped to put this together. So this is definitely a union book. It's printed by union workers. And so how much of this was you, and how much was it 2dcloud? really hyping the all-Americanness, right? I mean, I opened this thing up, and it's the equivalent of hearing a chant USA, USA, but in a somewhat ironic way.
Well, I don't know if it's ironic. Rain was very patient with my search for a union printer. Okay. I was like, I wanted it to look like a political, like flyer or advertisement. I wanted it to look like the ephemera that would go along with a political campaign.
Okay.
So, they always have those union bugs on them. And so, I wanted to get that, and it just seemed right to make it kind of loud and kind of visual and bold. And then hide the word penis on the cover.
Yeah.
It's that's what I was going to say. It's like one of those magic eye tricks.
Yeah.
To see the title in the cover, but then once you find it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
Well, coming back to your new book, Trying Not to Notice, much of it is based on the stand-up comedy scene, and then how that branches off into, I guess, the larger, entertainment world in the United States. I mean, how much knowledge do you have? How much research did you do? What kind of experience at all might you have had with stand-up comedy?
Oh, I have no experience with stand-up comedy. I think probably like most cartoonists, I listen to a lot of podcasts with comedians on them. That's probably the extent of my background information.
Learning through podcasts.
Yeah, just learning through podcasts. Yeah,
that's what we like to hear.
I think reading articles maybe about comedians. That's really the extent of it for that. I mean, Fingerprints, my other book, was kind of it was also about like Hollywood culture in California. I think there's just this subconscious thing with me that is interested and kind of like picks up things about that culture that I want to write into stories. I'm not sure why.
It's interesting that you mentioned the kind of learning about stand-up comedy through podcasts, because I was just listening the other day to an interview with Amy Schumer where they were talking about how, prior to this kind of era of podcasts like WTF and so on, the only thing people ever, knew about the inside of stand-up comedy was basically from the movie Punchline with Tom Hanks and Sally Field, which is a terrible movie and a terrible representation of stand-up comedy.
That's sad.
But now we kind of know we have a whole, plethora of comedians who are talking about what their lives as comedians are like, what the business is like, and we have, shows like Louis C.K.'s show, which gives us a more accurate representation of what that world is like.
And I mean, I'm fascinated. One of my favorite podcasts I don't know if they're still doing it, but Slate was doing it for a while about, I think it was just called Working. Like the Stud Terkel's book. But I just love listening to people talk about their jobs. I mean, I can listen to anybody talk deeply about it. Like if they feel strongly about their job and if it's really important to them, I love listening to people talk about that sort of thing. And that's the fun thing about, listening to, say, comedians talk about their work is they're very passionate about it. So you get to hear some very interesting stories or kind of get you thinking about your own work.
Mm. Well, that doesn't surprise me because in reading through your various comics, the longer and the shorter ones, I mean, you're really democratic, right, in the kind of topics and the kind of people and occupations that you focus on. I mean, I don't think that if I would attempt to put my finger on the kind of subject matter that you tend to write about, the kind of people, I'd feel stymied because I think that you do a really good job of getting into a variety of different people and contexts and then just fleshing those out. So hearing you say that you could listen to anybody talk about the job that they do makes a lot of sense to me.
Oh, yeah. Thanks. Yeah, It's. I think it says a lot of, or I can learn a lot about a person listening to them talk about their work, for sure.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you're currently at work on your next project, which is also going to be a longer form comic. Can you tell us anything about that?
Yeah, I'm almost done with it, so I'm fine talking about it now. It's about a religious cult. So it's this. About a woman who kind of slowly gets involved with this kind of religious sect and then becomes more and more ingrained into their culture, and then about where that takes her. And that's like 4 of Trying Not to Notice's. Yeah.
4 in terms of the length?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when could we expect to see that book?
Well, I'll be done with the first draft by the end of the year, or in, I don't know, 3 more months maybe. I'm writing the 13th chapter and drawing the 12th, and there's like 15 chapters, I think, in total. So that's almost done. I'm feeling good about finishing it. There are 100 previous pages of this book that I did that I threw away. So I know I'm not going to be throwing away what I've done at this point. I know how it's going to go.
I'm really curious to see would you do that, because that's yet another topic that seems like it would be so easy to be kind of exploitive or dismissive of of a cult or the kind of people that get into the cult. And so approaching that from the kind of position of empathy that you do with so many of your characters, I think would be really fascinating.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it is. It's very much like, why would somebody actually get involved with something like that? When you think about like, and there are people who love to talk about cults and know a lot about cults, and I'm not one of those people. But I do know a little bit about People's Temple, and they're a very like liberal. Like they did a lot of public works and political activism, and really made a home for a lot of people before they all fled the country and killed themselves. Mm-hmm. So it's how do you get there? Is interesting.
Well, did you do a lot of reading, some research into the various cults?
Yeah, I mean, if you've known me for any length of time, like this has always been the book that I've been wanting to do. Most other stories kind of like catch me for a little while, and then I work on them till they're done. But this is one I'd always really wanted to do. So for a long time I was doing research, and then at a certain point I have to stop because especially at this point the book is kind of what it is, and I don't want to get any more ideas.
Right.
That kind of throw me off course or something.
And will this be a 2D Cloud book as well?
I don't know. I have no idea. Like, it's like all of my stories, it's like when it's done, then I'll kind of like see what it is, you know, and what's best, who's most appropriate. Like, the cool thing about 2dcloud is they have an identity, you know. They have like a voice, and Rain has a very good vision for the kinds of things that he likes to publish. And you can almost tell what a 2dcloud book is without the kind of without their logo on it. And so I like that about comics publishing in particular. It's not something you see in traditional publishing as much. Maybe the micro presses, you know, they kind of have a clear identity of the kind of things that they like to publish. But I mean, how many book publishers do you follow?
Was that a rhetorical question? You're asking us directly.
I'm asking directly. I mean, you guys might. I don't know. Maybe you read more than me.
There are certain publishers I'm on board for with almost anything that they do.
Yeah, like who?
Well, I mean, kind of obvious ones. I think they're kind of obvious, given the things that we talk about in our podcast and our individual interests. Andy and I share Fantagraphics and Drawn and Quarterly. I mean, I'll look at
publishers for sure. I mean, like
you're talking about like regular trade publishers.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That is
like
a good question.
Prose publisher, like Fantagraphics for sure. Yeah, absolutely. They have a sure editorial, like all the comics publishers do. But it seemed like traditional book publishing used to have that too. And I don't know. I think of $2 Radio. This is like a literary publisher. There isn't a single thing they'll publish that I won't read. But I can't think of anybody else that for sure I'll like their books.
Yeah. I mean, there may be imprints or something that have a particular focus that make me interested, but otherwise, you're right in the same way that, a movie studio is not distinguishable anymore the way, the way they used to be in the 20s and 30s or whatever. Yeah,
where like maybe they do something a little off, but it's your kind of off. Like you just always know that that's the right thing for you, and you know that that's the kind of stories they like to tell. I like that about the comics publishing landscape, that each kind of have their own identity.
Yep.
Well, Will, we want to thank you for coming on the Comics Alternative and talking about not only your work for 2dcloud, but specifically your book, Trying Not to Notice, that will be available in November. Now, if people see you at Small Press Expo next month, will they be able to get a copy of the book there?
They will, yes. They will be able to get a copy there. I'll have copies, and then 2dcloud is they're going to be there as well, and you can get copies from them also.
But otherwise, it won't be available, let's say, for people purchasing off, let's say, online until November.
Yeah.
Okay. It's definitely something to look forward to, definitely something that we recommend our listeners pick up. And, Will, again, thank you for being on the show.
Oh, thanks, you guys. It was great.
Yeah, thanks.
We're pleased to be talking with MariNaomi. Her new book, Turning Japanese, or graphic memoir, just came out last May from 2dcloud. Mari, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
Yep, thanks for being here.
You've published other books before this. There was Kiss and Tell, a romantic resume, age 0 to 22. And then not quite a couple of years ago, there was Dragon's Breath and Other True Stories. And Turning Japanese is similar in that it tells us something about your life. As you say in the subtitle, it's a graphic memoir. But the thing for me, at least, that stands out in terms of turning Japanese, this seems to be your first long-form work, whereas your earlier comics were collections of shorter stories or more episodic narratives. And I'm wondering if you went into turning Japanese with that in mind, wanting to write a more cohesive, longer story of your life.
Very much so. I thought it was about time I did that. And so I did. And very recently, a friend of mine, cartoonist Rob Kirby, pointed out, "Oh, this is great. It's a series of vignettes." And I was like, what the hell? But then when I went back to it, I realized, well, yeah, I guess it is. I guess I tell life stories in vignette styles because I think that's how my memory recalls them. So it to me, it still seems long form, especially compared to the others, but it's true. There's a series of little stories that all are woven together to make the big one.
You know, one of the things I really appreciate about your work, and having read Kiss and Tell a while ago, especially, and then coming to turning Japanese, is it's almost akin to reading like a series of books set in a superhero universe. In that you know you will reference a character, you reference a person in your life, and for, you know, dedicated readers that'll recall, you know, like, for example, turning Japanese begins with you mentioning that you had just broken up with Francis, and so anybody who's read Kiss and Tell will know about the Francis relationship. But then your other recent book, I Thought You Hated Me, is also kind of episodic over a span of years, and so readers can kind of fit those vignettes into the other vignettes that you've told, and so on. And so there's a real payoff, it seems like, for dedicated readers.
It's a giant puzzle. Absolutely. I've never read superhero books before, but that makes me curious. I didn't realize they would have people keep popping up.
Well, it would be like, you know, Spider-Man shows up in an issue of The Incredible Hulk, and you know, if you're reading Spider-Man that month, that Spider-Man's on his way to go fight Electro or whatever. You know? So we know that, we know what happened to, you know, the continuity of your life, what happened with Francis before, and there's no retcons or revisions going on to the past.
It's the continuity of the MariNaomi universe.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's funny because when I wrote Kiss and Tell, I changed pretty much most of the names got changed, and some scenarios, you know, to hide identities and whatnot. And when I wrote the last book, or even turning Japanese, like, I have to remember what pseudonyms I give people.
Right.
And the very most recent book that I did for Retrofit that hasn't come out yet is about someone who plays a bit part in Kiss and Tell, and it's funny because for Kiss and Tell there were certain friends who they were not the main focus of the book. The main focus were my romantic crushes and whatnot. But so for some of the friendships, I combined experiences that I would have with various different friends and just created basically a new person sometimes. For example, if I had a cynical friend when I was young, and then I had very young, and then I had a cynical friend a few years later, perhaps I'd change friends, but then they would turn into the same friend in Kiss and Tell. And so there are certain things, certain stories about a character named Mirabai, who the most recent book is about, that appear in Kiss and Tell that actually didn't happen with Mirabai. It happened with someone else. So yeah, I try to be pretty honest about the stories, but there are some combined continuity problems that I wish I'd had the foresight to maybe not combine certain things.
Now, we've referenced a couple of times your book that's about to come out. This is I Thought You Hated Me. It's going to be coming out from Retrofit Big Planet Comics, which is one of our favorite publishers. And this will be released in, I think, later September, correct?
For SPX.
Okay, so yes, in time for SPX. But your most recent book, the one that's actually out, Turning Japanese, is a 2dcloud book. And you mentioned a second ago about your intentions to creating a more long-form autobiographical work. For those who may not be familiar with Turning Japanese, how would you describe them, or describe this book, especially as it may be different from, let's say, Dragon's Breath and other true stories?
So the elevator pitch is when I was a young 20-something, after a whole lifetime of growing up around pretty much white people, even though I'm half Japanese, and I had no clue about the Japanese culture. I wasn't taught the language, and as I was exiting my first long-term relationship, I was sort of finding myself, as people that age do, and I thought it would be good to sort of get to know that side of my cultural heritage. And I decided that a fun way to learn Japanese and get to know the culture would be to work as a Japanese bar hostess, which is sort of like a bartender, except a little more involved, where women usually are paid to sit with usually men, and usually Japanese businessmen, and keep the conversation going between them, play parlor games, sing karaoke with them. So they're there for, and also to mix the drinks and whatnot. So that's how I thought I would get to know my culture. And with the idea was that I would work at this bar and then go to Japan and work, so learn the language on my own and through this bar, and then get good enough at it that I would eventually go to Japan and get really better working as a bar hostess there, and then eventually traveling to southern Japan to visit my mom's side of the family who couldn't speak English. And I was never able to communicate that with them directly, so the idea was that I would, for the first time in my life, get to know them without my mom as the interpreter / cultural editor that she turned out to be. That's the premise.
So one of the themes you really touch on that runs through this book is, as you mentioned earlier in that summary, how growing up you didn't have much of a connection to Japanese culture, and in the book that seems to come across through your mom's resistance to that. Is, what was going on there? You have an understanding of the reasons why you weren't, as a child, kind of brought up in that culture?
Well, I have a lot of theories, but ultimately, the last time I asked my mom this question, because it's a question that I've asked many times throughout my life, her response was, "I don't know why she didn't want to teach me Japanese, why I wasn't part of that culture." And she's told me a lot of things over the years, which some of it's included in the book, and I've definitely drawn my own conclusions, which I sort of tease out in the book, because that's kind of what the book is about too, is about my relationship with my mom and figuring out why she, in my opinion at the time, withheld this from me. But I discovered throughout everything that it was a lot more complicated than, she was too lazy to teach me Japanese or whatever. So really, I have my own theories. I assume that she has her own theories, and I've talked to readers who they have their own theories, but I feel like there's no solid answer to why. It's kind of a part of a bigger puzzle, and I think, it's too hard of a question.
Okay.
Well, has your mom read Turning Japanese?
Yes.
And has that changed anything between you two, or do you feel that she may have a better understanding of how you feel, which is maybe questioning how she feels or why she did what she did? In other words, did the book generate any kind of dynamic between you two?
No. I haven't seen her since the book came out, and she hasn't really talked about it. But I feel like everything that I put in the book is stuff that I've talked to her about already. So she's not going to have a lot of surprises.
So it's not like when you published Kiss and Tell.
No. And to be fair with Kiss and Tell, even though there were a lot of surprises, I made sure that my parents knew the surprises before the general public did. Mm. It's some pretty awkward emails.
I think that's another place where you're reading all of your work or following your work for a long period of time really pays off too, because in Kiss and Tell you are dealing with your relationship with your parents, and you get to see the kind of tumultuous relationship there, the periods where you ran away from home and so on. And so then coming to Turning Japanese, you can kind of see how some of that history informs this as well.
Yeah. It's not something that I've written a lot of stuff directly about. Turning Japanese is probably the closest I've come to really sussing out my relationship with my parents. It's so complicated.
But it feels like at the end of Turning Japanese, I don't feel like this is necessarily a spoiler, that you come to a kind of equilibrium or a level of comfort there where, you flash forward basically to a decade later when you see your grandparents next, and you're fine with your mom translating at this point.
It's true. Once I saw a little bit into why she was the reluctant translator, I definitely, through the experience in Turning Japanese and learning Japanese at the time, it gave me a lot more empathy for what she was going through.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it's interesting to describe your comics, and not just Turning Japanese, in terms of your relationship with your parents. I think in Turning Japanese, this definitely comes through in terms of the mother. And if we look, I guess, in a broader sense, just beyond the mother, it's your relationship with your Japanese heritage, and where you may not have had much of an investment in it when the story begins. By the time we get to the end of the book, maybe there's a little more. And there's one part of this story that really struck me, and maybe it struck me and stood out for an obvious reason, and this is not quite 200 pages into it. This is where you go with, I think it's your aunt. You go to see the Goddess of Mercy, the Temple of the Goddess of Mercy, and there seems to be, I don't know if there is an epiphanic moment in this book, but maybe the closest thing we have to an epiphany occurs after you go, or when you go to the Temple of the Goddess of Mercy. And it seems to change you in some way, in that when you return home with your grandmother in a part that's called Prayer Part 2, when she asks about praying, you do it without any reluctance whatsoever. And this comes right after that scene. Did you, as you were writing this, did you intend that Temple of Goddess scene to be at least semi-climactic?
I do. It was probably the only spiritual moment I've had in my entire life as a devout atheist. And, by when I say atheist, that just means I don't believe in gods as people perceive them. But I do think that there's a lot of stuff out there that is just not explained yet. Mm-hmm. And that scene in the Temple of the Goddess of Mercy is certainly one of my life events where, despite being very skeptical of ghosts and stuff like that, like, I definitely felt something there. It was huge. And it also opened me up definitely to their spirituality, even though I might not subscribe to my family's brand of spirituality. It made me open-minded.
Mm-hmm. And the reason I mentioned earlier that it seemed somewhat obvious that I would think of that as kind of a turning point of some sort in your story is that the scene from the Temple of the Goddess of Mercy is in many ways the image that we have on the book cover. Because before I picked up the book, or before I opened up the book and started to read it, I was wondering, okay, what to make of this cover? I mean, knowing about your previous work and then seeing the title Turning Japanese and seeing the multiple images of your face, or at least half face on the cover, it's like, ooh, okay, multiple ways of seeing herself. That makes sense. But then these things floating above your head, what are they, ghosts of the past? Or given what we read in Kiss and Tell, is this weird kind of sperm? I don't know. What is this? And what does it have to do with this story? So then by the time you get to page, let's say 193, 194, I see the image of you being visited by these images, ghosts, whatever they are, which leads me back to the cover. It's like, that's what the cover image means.
I didn't actually make the cover. That was someone at 2dcloud.
Oh, really?
Yes, that was the designers of that book.
So they did not ask you for your input?
Well, I mean, they came up with some designs and said, what do you think?
Vincent Stahl, is that?
Yes, perfect, there it is. Mm-hmm. He's fantastic. And Will Dinski did the interior. They are just graphic design geniuses over there, which I am not. I am terrible at that. So, but there has been a lot of speculation as to why the cover is the way it is. And I personally, I mean, it means so many different things to me. The most obvious would be the multiple personalities that come with being multicultural. Mm-hmm. And I think that's pretty much what they were going for. But also it's a cool design.
Yeah. Well, how did you first get introduced to 2dcloud?
Let's see. They were at a convention that I went to, and I was on a panel with Noah Van Sciver, where it was a super fun panel, even though it was first thing in the morning. Mike Dawson was the moderator, and so basically the people in the audience were my friend Julia Words and my husband Gary and one other person. And so it was just first thing in the morning and super fun panel. And so afterwards, and I kept making Noah blush by saying the word jizz. Because apparently it's really easy to embarrass the dude. And so after our panel, I went up to Noah's table and apologized-ish for making him feel awkward on a podcast. And apparently, and I kind of don't remember this, apparently that was the 2dcloud table, and that's when I was introduced to Rain, who later on contacted me on the internet asking if I wanted to be part of an anthology. And at this point, I was I'd done a lot of anthologies, so I wasn't that excited about it, but it was in support of marriage equality in Minnesota, so it was a really good cause. And so I said yes, and when I got my contributors' copies, I was so blown away with how beautiful the book was. So that's sort of how they got on my radar. And eventually, they asked me to do more work for them for another anthology, and I did. And at the time, my agent was shopping around Turning Japanese. And this was a long, long time ago. And I asked my agent, I said, hey, these guys, have you heard of these guys? They're really great. And I felt just a big rapport with Rain Hogan. And so I asked Gordon if he would pitch the book to them. And so he did. And that worked out. So Turning Japanese was the book that they originally agreed to publish. But they ended up publishing Dragon's Breath and other true stories before Turning Japanese came out, which was originally, I was going to just self-publish it, but I at the time asked if they would help me distribute it, and they ended up just saying, well, we'll publish it, and this will be a trial run for Turning Japanese, and that worked out pretty well.
Now, I first became aware that Turning Japanese was coming out because I think Publishers Weekly put it as one of the notable books coming out for the spring or early summer. And I had already read Kiss and Tell a while ago, but I was wondering what, with something like that, getting kind of attention before it comes out, and since it's been out since May, what kind of reception has Turning Japanese gotten for you?
Well, I don't feel like people love it as much as they love Dragon's Breath. And I could see why. Dragon's Breath is a lot more emotional, very emotionally charged, whereas Turning Japanese is telling a longer story. It's not as dramatic. But, so I don't feel like it connects quite as much to a general, broader audience. However, the sales are a lot better. And also the people it does connect with, it seems to connect with really strongly. And I feel like most of those people are people who've felt stuck between not necessarily cultures like Japanese or whatever, but just stuck in the middle of something, some kind of culture or subculture, or between families or whatnot. One person said she connected with it because of the language barrier that is a struggle throughout the book, is me finding out that it's a lot more complicated to learn another language than just, figuring out the alphabet, etc., and figuring out the words. There's a whole cultural part of that. So people, it's interesting to me why people are connecting with it, and it's really exciting for me every time someone does, of course, because that's the whole point of it.
Now,
so I'm pretty happy with the reception. I've never had a bestseller before, so it's exciting.
Are most of the stories in Dragon's Breath originally ones that originally appeared on the Rumpus?
Not all of them, but most of them, yes.
Okay. So I'm wondering if the fact that they were originally published on the Rumpus and then collected here, I mean, that was a way for people to get you in small chunks. So that's going to resonate with a certain kind of reader, whereas a longer work like Turning Japanese will get another kind of reader. Because, as much as I enjoyed the stories in Dragon's Breath and Other True Stories, I think I felt more connected to what was going on in Turning Japanese, and not just because of any empathetic similarities. It's like, I didn't go through the same thing as you may have, but I think it's this longer quest that seemed to really appeal to me.
That's great to hear. I like that. I mean, the amount of work that I put into Turning Japanese is so much more than what I put into Dragon's Breath. Not saying that I didn't put work into Dragon's Breath. Obviously, I did, but there was a lot of plotting that goes on when you're doing your first long-form story that doesn't happen when you're just spewing out these little experiences bit by bit. So, yeah, the whole... There was a lot of time just sitting with the story, figuring out where I wanted to go on a broader level. So that feels good to hear. Thank you.
You mentioned earlier in your little anecdote about how you came across 2dcloud, that you're friends with Julia Wirtz, and she has a strip in I think it's Drinking at the Movies that to me encapsulates this dilemma of autobiographical comics. And she's at a con tabling, and someone a reader comes up to her and starts kind of criticizing her relationships. Do you ever feel that readers and fans that you've never met kind of assume a level of intimacy with you when they do meet you?
All the time. But it's kind of cool. I mean, if I'm prepared for it, if I'm at a comic convention, I expect that to happen. The only times I'm taken aback is when I'm in a non-comics environment and someone recognizes me and feels like they know me. It's a little jarring because first of all, I'm really bad at remembering people. I'm bad at remembering names. I'm bad at remembering faces. I'm bad at remembering things that happened, which is hilarious because I'm a memoirist. But so when someone comes up to me and acts like they know me, basically I'm in panic mode thinking, who is this person? Oh, a horrible person. I can't remember this person. And then usually after a little while, it'll become clear that, oh no, I've never met this person. But there have been plenty of other times where people have done that. And yes, I had dinner with this person or something happened. So So there's that part of it. But yeah, I feel that too. There are cartoonists and memoirists who I've read their stuff that I feel really connected to, who I don't actually know very well, because that's how good, I think that's a sign of good writing, is that people have this false sense of intimacy.
Now, as an artist, you call yourself a memoirist. You just referred to yourself as such. I mean, is that how you would describe yourself, as a cartoonist, period, or do you have plans to do something other than autobiographical comics?
Well, I have done some things other than autobio, but y'all just haven't seen them yet. To be continued.
Is that a hint as to what we have to look forward to in the future?
I hope so. I mean, I'm working on it. There are definitely a few things in the mix that I'm excited about, but I don't want to jinx them yet.
Okay.
But I have also written a lot of fiction, but it wasn't very good because I was young and inexperienced. But I definitely do have experience writing fiction. I haven't written a lot of good fiction yet, so I'm working on it.
You're talking about prose fiction?
Yeah, prose and comics.
Okay, so fictional comics.
Yeah.
Now, what kind of comics, you mentioned that you don't read superhero comics, but what kind of comics do you tend to gravitate toward for your own reading experience? I mean, the more autobiographical, or just almost anything other than superheroes?
Well, I am definitely pulled towards memoir, both in comics and not in comics. But I do expand my horizons on all fronts as well. But definitely I skew towards the indie stuff. Mostly kind of a little artsy, but still with a narrative. But I mean, I'll push out my boundaries all the time. I'm just looking for anything that tells a good story or is interesting or makes me feel an emotion. But primarily memoir, because I feel like my theory is I'm most attracted to memoir because even if the storytelling isn't that great or the art's not that great, at least there's some kind of honesty to it. I don't know. But yeah, I'm not into the mainstreamy type stuff or manga or anything like that. I've tried and I'll keep trying, but I'm just pulled to the indie stuff.
You mentioned manga. Do people assume, because you're half Japanese, that you read manga?
Yes. And it's funny because of all the types of comics that I'm not interested in, that's probably the number one. It's just never struck a chord with me. I've not been able to find manga that really resonates with me yet.
You know, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of this when I first read Turning Japanese, but I guess now, in light of this conversation, I would have thought that maybe there would be some mention of manga. I mean, I've heard of a number of people who are into comics, both, they love to read them or they're creators themselves. And so when they go to Japan, they consciously seek out manga just to see what the scene is like. But that is absent from Turning Japanese.
Well, so I don't want to say dislike, but my vague negative feelings for manga started at a very young age. I think I was maybe 4 or 5 when I first saw my first manga, and I immediately didn't like it. And the reason, or my reasoning at the time as a very, very young child, and I still at the age of 43 feel this way, is that, my first instinct was to look at these blonde-haired, giant, big blue-eyed people and say, why do these Japanese people hate themselves so much? Like, why are they drawing their exact opposite? And I mean, I was super young when I said and thought that, but I haven't been able to shake that feeling, even though now I know that there's a lot more out there. It's not all like that, but for some reason my first impression really stuck. when the events of turning Japanese were taking place, I wasn't drawing comics yet. In fact, I started drawing comics probably just a couple months after I returned from Japan in that trip. My boyfriend in that book, Giuseppe, he was really into comics, so he was seeking those things out, but I was more interested in food.
But we do see him seeking out toys.
Yeah.
And turning Japanese. Yeah.
That's interesting that you say that you didn't start drawing comics until after the events of turning Japanese, because that reminds me of I Thought You Hated Me, your upcoming book, where you deal with this friendship that seems to hinge in some ways around artistic interest. But it is only kind of after that relationship, I guess during a gap in that relationship, that you start to get involved in comics then?
Well, I've always done artistic things, just not comics specifically, until 1997, I think it was. But I definitely painted, and I was writing bad novels, as I say, before that ever happens. And yeah, I was very artistic, just not with comics yet.
Okay, so you've mentioned this non-memoir comic that you're working on that you don't want to jinx. Is there anything in addition to the upcoming I Thought You Hated Me that we can look forward to?
Not quite yet.
Okay.
But I'm working on it. I have finished a young adult graphic novel, but it's going to be a long time before you ever see that. And I'm also working on another memoir, and also working on a fiction for mature audiences, graphic novel. These are all things in the works because apparently I just can't stop making comics. But I mean, eventually, I would like to say that yes, eventually you will see this young adult thing, and which I'm excited about. But it'll take a while because I'm planning on doing 3 books, and so I'm working on the second out of 3. And you know how long comics take.
Yeah.
Well, right now, our listeners can find a copy of Turning Japanese, a graphic memoir that came out a couple of months ago from 2dcloud. And then next month, around the time of SPX, they will be able to see your new book from Big Planet Retrofit, I Thought You Hated Me.
Yep.
Yep.
And besides SPX, do you have other con appearances coming up?
Yeah. Let me look at my website. I've been saying yes to basically anyone who's willing to fly me out. So, I'll be at SPX, and then I'm doing a panel with at the Brooklyn Book Festival with Chester Brown and Phoebe Gluckner.
Oh wow,
cool!
Excited about that. And what did they call me? And they said something, an up and comer or something in their press, and that excited me. It made me feel young. And I have a couple of Los Angeles events, and then I'm going to be in Minneapolis for NerdCon Stories, and then some more Los Angeles, and I'll be at Stan Lee's Comikaze Expo. And at the moment, that's all I have on the books, but they're all on my website. I keep it very up to date.
Wow, well, that's a lot.
You know, it is a lot, because I was thinking after the last tour, I thought, you know what, I just want to hunker down and make comics for the next 10 years and not travel around. But then it's really impossible for me to say no to a free plane ticket, so.
Yeah. Well, I will be at SPX next month, so I can say hello in person.
Please do. I'll be juggling back and forth from 2dcloud and Retrofit. And
that's right. You have to satisfy both tables.
And I'm only there on Saturday because the Brooklyn Book Festival is on Sunday, so I'm flying out that night. Very exciting.
Mari, thank you very much for being on the podcast, and definitely look forward to meeting you next month.
You too. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Yay.
Yeah, those were fun conversations, and in fact, they were so much fun that after them, my wife wanted to know what was going on upstairs. That I was laughing so much, so she could hear it all the way on the other end of the house. How much fun those interviews were!
Yeah, see, there you go. Podcasting can be fun.
Some days,
yes. So if you're talking with fun people.
Yeah.
And Gina, Will, and Mari were definitely interesting to talk to. I mean, not only were the conversations full of interesting insights, but just, we had our share of laughs with all three.
Yes, we did.
Yeah. So if you didn't know much about 2dcloud before this interview show, you should definitely check them out now. And in fact, go to their website, 2dcloud.com, to find out more about these books. That is the number 2dcloud.com. You should also check out the website of our sponsor for this episode, and that's Discount Comic Book Service. Go to dcbservice.com. They'll take care of all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do check them out and visit the website of 2dcloud, get in touch with us and let us know what you think about these interviews. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message through the wonders of SpeakPipe, which is really easy to use. Or if you want to be a little more difficult about it, pick up the phone and dial the old-fashioned way. 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
That's right. Or you can get a hold of us by email. We are 2guys@comicsalternative.com. Or you can get a hold of us individually. I'm Andy at comicsalternative.com.
And I'm Derek at comicsalternative.com.
And we also have our Twitter feed, where we announce new content of the podcast and updates to the blog. Check out the Twitter feed at the number 2 guys with PhDs.
That's right. You can also find us on Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, and YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn. You can listen to the podcast via Spotify, and if you're an Android user, through Google Play Music. But you can find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the reviews and the comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, by going to our website, comicsalternative.com.
It's all the ways to get a hold of us and let us know how we're doing.
That's right, and we do like to hear from you. Until next time, I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy. See ya.